Communications Associate with the ACLU of Nebraska. Reproductive justice is important to me because it's about knowledge, it's about access to quality care without boundaries, and about trusting women, friends, and birthing Nebraskans to make the right choice about their bodies alongside medical professionals and not in politics. I'll do a classic virtual popcorn to Scout, who is immediately to the right of me.
Hi, thanks, Jasmine. My name is Scout Richters. I'm also from the ACLU of Nebraska. I'm legal and policy counsel. And I would say that reproductive justice is important to me because it's really about our right to make decisions that are fundamental to our lives and futures. And I think that these personal decisions are just so essential to gender equity, economic justice, racial equality, and that is why reproductive justice is important to me. And I will pass it to Senator Hunt.
Thank you so much, Scout. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. I'm Megan Hunt, and I represent District 8 in the Nebraska legislature, which includes the neighborhoods of Dundee and Benson and basically the north part of Midtown Omaha. I got elected in 2018, and I ran very openly and proudly on a pro-reproductive justice platform. And, you know, abortion care and reproductive justice is really important to me because I just trust people to know what's best for them. And I really don't like it when medical decisions and like such personal moral decisions get into the realm of politics. And, you know, no matter what religious background or ideological background you're coming from, I support your right to do what you want with your body. And that's the standard that I think we just need to have for all people. Oh, and I'm supposed to do it. I'll send it to Ashlei.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. And hey, everybody out there in virtual land. I am Ashlei Spivey. I am the director of Ivy Black Girl. My pronouns are she, her. And reproductive justice and the conversation about abortion access is super important to the work of Ivy Black Girl, but just myself as a woman navigating this world. And to Senator Hunt's point, right, like, we trust people to decide their healthcare choices. Like, you know what's best for you in every aspect of your life, and you should have access and opportunity to all of those choices. And so for me, it's really not around like who's good, who's bad, what's the right decision or the wrong decision. You should have access, and abortion access is healthcare. It's a part of that spectrum, and we want to make sure that all folks have access to that opportunity, to that tool, and what is best for them in that decision making at that time. And so we are in such an important kind of milestone in this fight, at least in like our lives, right? Like, this has been going on for a very long time. And so it feels very special and important that Ivy Black Girl can lead in this space and participate on behalf of our community. So thank you for having us. And last but not least, my homegirl, Andi. Hey, girl.
Thank you, Ashlei. So I'm Andi Curry Grubb. I'm the state executive director for Nebraska for Planned Parenthood, North Central States. And it's hard to come up with anything that hasn't already been said. It's all of the same reasons. I think people can and should be trusted with decisions about their bodies, their lives, their families. I think it is a core tenet of equity in our country for folks to have all of the access and information they need to make those decisions that are personal to them. So I support the full spectrum of what's been said about why this is so important.
Awesome. Thank you for that, everyone. So let's get right into the legal meat of it all. Scout, we're going to go to you first. What was today's arguments about? Give us like the top lines, the summary for the lawyers, the non-lawyers, including me.
Okay, well, as you had said from the beginning, Jasmine, today the Supreme Court did hear oral arguments, and really it can only be described as the most important abortion rights or reproductive rights case in 50 years or more. Roe and the cases that have followed it have all upheld this core principle that, we have the right to make fundamental decisions about our health and our lives and our futures. And that does include the right to abortion. The court has been clear in affirming this. And this case marks the first time in those 50 years that the court has agreed to hear a case that directly challenges this settled law related to abortion. And the threat is very real. Mississippi asked the Supreme Court to directly overturn Roe v. Wade by upholding a 15-week ban well before a pregnancy is viable. And the outcome will certainly have national implications. If the court allows a state to enforce this ban, but at the same time, I really want to make clear that regardless of the decision that the court reaches in this case, Nebraskans' immediate future with respect to reproductive rights rests with Senator Hunt and her 48 co-state senators in the unicameral. And that's why we're using today's, no pressure, Senator. That's why we're using today's hearing really as a day of education and as a call to action that it's up to all of us to protect reproductive freedom and ensure that abortion is accessible for Nebraskans who need it. And that means getting the word out about this very real threat and telling our elected leaders to stop the bans and start respecting the fact that we have these fundamental rights to make these personal decisions.
Awesome. And just a reminder, as I ask everyone questions, feel free to jump in anywhere. But next up, Senator Hunt. So like Scout said, no pressure, but let's talk about the legislature here in Nebraska. What has been done so far to make abortion access more restrictive than it should be here?
Well, over the past 15, 20 years, and, probably before that, but as long as abortion has been under attack in the United States, it's been under attack in Nebraska, of course. And in my time in the legislature, we've passed a couple bills like a method ban, a ban on a certain method of abortion, which really stands between the ability of a patient and their doctor to decide what care is right for them. We cannot be taking away from providers their right to decide the best standard of care. And there aren't any physicians in the Nebraska legislature who have any business telling a doctor that a procedure that's considered the standard of care should be illegal, because that's actually putting patients in danger when they do that. But we did pass that. We also passed a bill saying that when people go in to get medication abortion, that the provider has to tell that patient that should they decide to, if they change their mind, that it may be reversible, which is cuckoo caca. Like, there's nothing to that, and has nothing to do with science or research or evidence. There's no proof that anything like this is possible. So we're basically putting pseudoscience into state statute, and that's the kind of thing that, when you talk to moderates, when you talk to even people who are anti-abortion, these are the kinds of things that really frustrate them when we're talking about regular Nebraskans, folks like my parents, or, just the everyday Republicans who are in our state. And no matter how you feel about abortion, it should be common sense that we're not going to stand between doctors and their ability to provide the standard of care, whatever that is for whatever procedure. And we're not going to put things into statute that have no scientific basis, that are literally scientifically false. So we have seen some issues in the legislature. What I will say is that we have, I think, the biggest coalition of pro-repro, pro-justice, pro-individual rights senators that we've ever had. So we have been able to block some of the worst bills that have been introduced. What concerns me about what's happening on the national stage in terms of today's arguments and everything is that anti-abortion conservatives are trying to kick this decision to the states. So what that will effectively do is create, reproductive refugees who are going to be traveling to different states to get the care that they need, while state legislatures all over the country are being undermined by attacks on voting rights, by racial justice, injustice that we see happening as a pandemic as well in this country. And so as the rights that we have in our states weaken, as, pro-Trump appointees who would have overturned the election are appointed to election committees and as commissioners, like we see this happening all over the country in our states. And so when we're talking about a rights issue, a civil rights issue, we don't let that be up to the states. We don't say, okay, states, you can decide if slavery should be illegal. You can decide if people can sit in the front or the back of the bus. We don't do that anymore. And we can't do that with any right, whether that's on the basis of race or religion or nationality or ability or gender. And that's what abortion is. It's healthcare, and healthcare is a right. And that's something that we need to enshrine and protect at the federal level.
This is another question for you, Senator Hunt, but also for anybody else. But one thing that's interesting about, the unicameral stuff is I think Nebraska is uniquely poised to handle or combat a potential 6-week ban in the legislature, more so than, let's say, like Texas, Mississippi. What are some reasons that you think Nebraska is more uniquely poised to handle this? And on that same note, how can Nebraskans get involved and really make sure that they tell their senators that this is a terrible idea?
Right. So in Nebraska, because of our nonpartisan unicameral, we have a majority conservative state legislature, and our state legislature skews much more conservative than Nebraskans actually are. Most Nebraskans support the right to abortion, but our legislature is a little bit more conservative than our population is as a whole. That's okay, because in the Nebraska legislature, we don't have any official party control. We don't have any caucuses. We don't have any majority minority leaders, which is what you see in other states. And a benefit to that is that we haven't had the heavy hand of the Republican Party platform coming down on us in terms of policy pressure. So even though, a lot of my colleagues personally hold anti-abortion beliefs, we still retain a lot of independence to decide the agenda that we're going to debate, the items that we're going to bring up on the floor. Anyone can certainly introduce any bill that they want. I expect a 6-week ban to be introduced. I expect all manner of, reproductive justice, horrible things to be introduced next year. But we also have a pretty substantial moderate contingency in the legislature that doesn't want to take these things up, that doesn't want to turn every session of the legislature into an abortion fight. And I'll tell you guys, with me there, if they have an abortion fight, we're going to be having an abortion fight all year. If you're going to do anything to trample the rights of people of color, of women, of Indigenous people, of disabled people, that's going to be the issue all year. And if you want your little tax cuts or whatever your little thing is that you're in there to do, don't bring an abortion bill, because that's what the whole session's going to turn into if you want to go down that road. And I think people kind of understand that. And so we hear the bill, we don't take it up on the floor. We have to kind of maintain that expectation. And what people need to do is just contact their state senator and say, I don't want the whole year to be an abortion fight. And I don't want Nebraska to turn into Texas. And share your personal story and say, I choose to live in Nebraska because I feel like this is a place where I can pursue my goals. Or I moved here because, I thought this was a place that would be welcoming to me. And in Nebraska, we're facing a big workforce shortage, and this has been the biggest issue identified by most of my colleagues in the legislature. So emphasize that point, say why it matters to you personally, and never feel like contacting an elected official isn't worth it, because it's just very important to build a record in these people's minds of where the public actually stands on this issue.
Amazing, thank you. Next up, Andi. Scout, you touched on this a little bit when we kind of did an overview of the state of the arguments, but what is the current status of abortion access in Nebraska?
Yeah, thank you. So as has been said already, abortion remains legal in the state of Nebraska, and that is not going to change without action from the state legislature. So just want to make sure that's super clear, particularly to patients who need care. That care is still available, and Planned Parenthood is proud to provide that care within our communities. That being said, there are barriers. Senator Hunt touched on some of these. Conservative lawmakers for years have been putting these seemingly small things in place to try to really push abortion access out of reach for people in the state. For example, we have a law that prohibits telehealth from being used for medication abortion. There's no reason for that. There's no medical reason. There's no scientific reason. It's strictly ideological, and there is wonderful evidence that shows it's an incredibly safe and effective means of providing medication abortion, and that it creates access to folks in more remote parts of our state. So laws like that continue to create barriers to patients being able to access the care they need. So, even with the protections of Roe, those barriers persist. And that's why, along with partners, along with Senator Hunt, we will continue doing everything we can to not only protect access to safe legal abortion, but also expand it anywhere that we possibly can.
Ashlei, up next. So Senator Hunt touched on this a little bit when you mentioned restricting abortion access and how it affects communities of color, Indigenous communities as well. We know that some communities are hit harder by restrictions than others. Can you talk about why access to abortion is a racial justice issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Through our work, we really try to take the approach to center, again, Black women, femmes, and girls, knowing that if we center us who are most impacted, there'll be ripples into communities that are traditionally cut out, excluded, or marginalized. And so, as Senator Hunt mentioned, when you talk about racial justice, those are all, reproductive justice, those are all the systems surrounding someone with the reproductive system. So that could look at safe and affordable housing, that's looking at voting rights, that's looking at quality food, wages, transportation, right? Like all of these things, because if you don't address them, that limits our access and opportunity to really thrive and have the quality of life that we decide for ourselves. And so into that spectrum of how all these things are interwebbed and fit together, my healthcare access is absolutely a part of those systems, right? So when I think about not only from abortion access, but thinking about contraceptives, right? If I am choosing to use contraceptives to prevent a pregnancy, I should not be told which contraceptives I should take, right? I should have opportunity and access to think about the pill, the patch, and IUD, condoms, right? Like the gamut, and that should not be limited. And it's the same when you think about your healthcare choices as you decide to or not become pregnant or stay pregnant and then parent. And so when you think about abortion access, we really want to make sure that people know and have all opportunity to decide and have safe choices that align to what they want to do. And so it's not just about making sure one type of abortion access is accessible, to Andi's point of limiting telehealth opportunity, right? Like I should be able to say, hey, this is my choice. And within those choices, here are the subsets of specific choices I can make. And I have power and choice in that. And then we're trusting people who are navigating that experience, who have lived in their bodies all their lives, to actually make that decision. And so when I think about, the Black community and how we show up in this space, it's been a hard conversation, and we have to name the nuance in the space, right? Like we have to name and understand the harm that the medical field has done to Black bodies. We have to understand the sterilization and the experiences through eugenics and in mass incarceration, and how that impacts generations of specifically Black communities, Black women, Black folks with reproductive systems. That can be true, as well as we need that access and opportunity. And so we have to be able to hold both and be able to create space for both. And so abortion access in this point in time is absolutely to the work of reproductive justice, the work of racial equity, because we know that institutional racism and all these other systems limits our opportunity and access now. And so my hope is that as folks of color are engaging in advocacy, engaging, using their voice, unpacking all of these things, that we really think about what is our role in making sure that government cannot limit our choices. Because that's, again, what it's about. Like, somebody can't say what I can do with my body in any case. And so I hope that folks are really leaning into that and being able to be in that gray, which is okay. And then saying, this is a racial justice issue. As a person of color, I am taking a role in this, again, whether you believe it's right or wrong, and I'm going to advocate for power and choice always.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. So, all right, let's see if we have any questions. I don't think we have any questions just yet.
Can I piggyback off something that
please,
Ashlei
yes.
said? So this is not like necessarily a comment about race, but like one thing that really frustrated me listening to the arguments today was how opponents of abortion are using this very crafty argument about contraceptives and saying, you know, in a world where women can have it all. There was a headline in the Washington Post or something that's going a little bit viral now, where there's some headline like, if women can have it all, why do we need to have abortion? And the implication is that, like, now that we can have childcare and we can have contraceptives and IUDs and we can control some more things about our fertility than you could in 1973, does abortion need to be legal? And the frustrating thing about this is that the idea that access to contraceptives, which the religious right and conservatives still are trying to take away from people, you know, in states where access to contraceptives is diminishing all the time. We see bills every year trying to make it harder to get birth control. The idea that contraceptives will reduce the need for abortion is just factually inaccurate, because abortion is not just for failed, you know, contraceptives. Sometimes there are fetal anomalies. Sometimes there are, you know, health issues for the parent. Sometimes there are all kinds of things. There are many reasons to terminate a pregnancy. And however you feel morally about any of them, not all of these reasons are due to failed contraceptives. And so that was just such a disingenuous, frustrating thing for me to hear from people who are trying to take away access to contraceptives, and then which doesn't even have anything to do with the argument. I could rant and say one more thing, but like, it is just so like intellectually lazy and pathetic, the arguments these people were making, like comparing Roe versus Wade to Plessy versus Ferguson. When Roe gives people rights and Plessy took away rights, caused oppression for people of color. And so they're making these really intellectually dishonest arguments that I really think are beneath the court. They're beneath the intelligence of the people, and they're beneath the seriousness of the issue as a civil right that this really brings. And I just see all of these privileged people who will never have to bear the consequences of their actions, unelected, lifetime appointment people in the Supreme Court, making these political decisions that are going to shape our entire society. And I mean, I just said all that because there wasn't a question from the audience, but.
Well, and to that point, Senator Hunt, like for me, when I think about it, it's like that ecosystem of healthcare, right? Like we can even talk about how all of these things ebb and flow together. So it's like, we need contraceptives in all of the forms. We need abortion access. We need comprehensive sex ed, right? Like we need all of these things to work together so that people with reproductive systems and women's can thrive. So we can make the best decisions at whatever point in our lives and do what it is that we need to do. And I think people silo a lot of this out, or they feel like, again, it's a black and white. So if you have contraceptives, then you won't need, and that's not how that works. That's not how any social system works. And healthcare is our social system. And so we really have to get people in the habit of understanding and being more critically reflecting intellectually, right? That like these are how these work together. This is how it supports. And if we want people to thrive, we don't need government. We don't need courts deciding what that looks like. We need the experts, which are the doctors and the peoples whose body it is to make those decisions. And, you know, some folks put in that work to really understand and unpack that, and others don't. And so my hope for the people, I've been watching the chat on my phone. If y'all see me looking down, people are like talking about it and discussing, like, that's what we need. We need community to come together, to have honest conversations, to unpack the hard parts about it, the things that we don't understand. So again, we can have an environment and a state where people can thrive and live and do what it is that they need to do. And my hope is that from this conversation, people can take that, people feel empowered to have that, and throughout this hard legislative session that we will be embarking on, that folks really engage in this movement building.
I know we're kind of sidetracking from questions, but I just want to add on, because I think this is why we wanted to have this conversation, right? This amazing group of people to get to talk to you about this stuff. But one of the things that just struck me so much today when I was listening to the arguments was that the Solicitor General of Mississippi kept saying again and again that we need to take this back to the people, that we need to take this back to the people. And he defines the people as state government. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, he's essentially saying he wants to take the right of this decision away from individuals and hand it to state governments instead. And that's his definition of taking it back to the people, which is just mind-boggling to me. And like you said, Senator Hunt, just intellectually lazy. Like, that doesn't actually work. And that's the kind of thing we need. You know, we know that Nebraskans support this on a whole. They support that individual autonomy and individual rights to make these decisions. And so why we would anticipate this is different than any other individual right or decision that folks can and should be making, I don't know. But that struck me. Take it back to the people. He kept saying it again and again.
Right.
I understand what that means.
We have fundamental rights is because they shouldn't be left up to the whims of people deciding. They're just so core and so fundamental. So I totally agree with your assessment on that, Andi and Senator Hunt and Ashlei. So
my mom always said, it's so hard to be right all the time.
That's great. I have a few more questions, but I want to get to a few questions that we have in the chat. The first one is from Grant. This one's directed to Senator Hunt. To what extent is implementing comprehensive sex education being discussed in the legislature as an alternative to reproductive justice?
So before Senator Hunt, you answer that, again, I'm watching the chat too. I just want to give a shout out to Brenda Counsel, who is in our chat, who is a great advocate for reproductive justice that's also answering questions and can give insight. So I just want to shout you out, Auntie Brenda, since you on here, so you know that we see you working in the chat for us.
I love Brenda. Thank you, Brenda, for being here in the chat. Brenda made a point that I will make too, and I encourage you to go see what Brenda said. But first, we can't think of comprehensive sex education as an alternative to things like contraceptive access and abortion access, because receiving medically accurate, age-appropriate, research-based education about our bodies should be a part of every education. It shouldn't be like a strategy to stop abortion or something. Like, maybe that happens. Maybe abortions decrease because people have more autonomy and knowledge about their bodies, and we have fewer unwanted pregnancies or something. But that's not just the only goal of comprehensive sex education. People really have the right to know the medical and biological facts about themselves and their bodies. And we know that this is the way to increase positive outcomes for kids and make them into healthier adults too. It's really a public health issue to me, more than it is about reproductive justice or anything like that. But to so much of what Ashlei has been saying, that's why all of these things are interconnected. So I was involved with Omaha Public Schools' adoption of comprehensive sex education in 2015. And that was very contentious. And it was a lot like what we saw this year in the State Board of Education when they were discussing a similar curriculum to update the sex education standards for all public students in Nebraska. And if you had followed any of that, you know that didn't really end up going anywhere. They did not adopt new standards for sex education in Nebraska. And I think with all the blowback that came from that, I think that we can expect to see some bills come up in the legislature to either like ban the teaching of comprehensive sex education or disband the Board of Education or any kind of ridiculous thing, because they're upset about sex education and they're also upset about critical race theory. And so all of these things are going to come into attacks on our public school system, attacks on teachers, and attacks on the institution that is already so weakened by policies that we have in Nebraska, and as far as their ability to serve every kid in the way that they really need. So I think we can see some bills come through regarding that for sure.
Can I just add to that? And I want to uplift what Brenda Counsel responded, that reproductive justice is a framework and approach, and comprehensive sex ed is like a lever underneath that. So it's not an either or. That's not how reproductive justice works. Reproductive justice is really looking at, again, all of those social systems surrounding someone with a reproductive system and how it impacts their lives. And so you'll see bills that maybe will come up around like the voter ID bill. That's a reproductive justice issue because it limits the way in which people, specifically people of color and women, folks at certain income levels, engage in policy and advocacy, right? And so the bill might not fit into specifically health related issues, or might not be titled something with health in the name or the intent. However, because of the social system surrounding all of us and how we operate in this world, it absolutely is a reproductive justice issue. And so the way in which we engage in that issue, the way in which that we create solutions, dismantle, build movements, that is the framing of reproductive justice. And those are the values and agreements that we hold. So I just kind of wanted to name that for Grant because it was a great question. And thank you again, Brenda Counsel, for your answer as well.
We've got a few more questions. This one is an interesting one, and I think it goes back to our October 2nd, where we had that huge day of action in Lincoln and Omaha. And around that, to kind of elevate some of our work, there were a few people that shared their story of abortion. And so Bailey asked, can you talk, either anyone who wants to talk about this from like their organization standpoint, personal standpoint, whatever, can you talk about why speaking out about abortion or sharing your abortion story can uplift the movement for reproductive justice?
I can start, and then if anybody wants to jump in. So, I'm going to keep it real with y'all on this here Zoom today, and I have mixed feelings about what does that look like. From my perspective, and again, centering my I statements, the stories that you normally hear around like deciding what makes the right abortion, right? So it's normally a pregnant person who has to choose between themselves and the child's life because they're so far along in their term, and there may be some sort of medical issue with the development of that baby, or that the folks that are normally sharing are white women or white pregnant folks. And for me, it creates in our minds shortcuts of who deserves an abortion or not. So people hear these stories around folks that are having these medical experiences with their pregnancy and they need an abortion, like, oh, well, that's the right kind. But, oh, because I choose to have one and I don't give you a reason, that's the wrong kind. And not everyone feels safe to share their experiences. And so, again, it's like, you start to build dominant narratives of who's accessing abortion care or not. And that's a really hard place for me. So personally, I don't think sharing your abortion story in that way is as helpful to the movement. For me, it's really about talking about healthcare access. Like, for whatever reason you decide to do this, you should have the space to decide. So how can we really focus on that and that decision point in your access and opportunity versus talking about, well, here's my experience, which also could be triggering for other people that may have had similar experiences. experiences or not. So I just want to name the murkiness of that for me. And when we're doing organizing around it, how it feels. But again, for folks that feel like that's the movement and the way in which you want to show up, well, then you have to decide that, and that's the way in which you show up.
Can I just add quickly? I agree with Ashley. We've talked about this a little bit, so I knew she was going to go there. I will also say I do think I couldn't agree more that we have to be very comprehensive in our story sharing, right? We have to make sure that we are not adding to the narrative that there is an okay reason to have an abortion and reasons that are not okay. If someone needs an abortion, they should be able to have an abortion, period. Whatever their reasons, whatever their background, whatever their situation. That said, I do think there is a real benefit to using stories as a way to reduce the stigma surrounding abortion. I think one of the things that makes this movement so challenging, and a lot of what we heard today in the Supreme Court arguments even, was about how this is such a challenging issue. It's such a divisive issue. That's not, the reality is we know that every single one of us has interacted with someone who's had an abortion. We all know in some way how abortion has impacted lives around us, but we struggle to talk about it. And I think the basic idea behind storytelling is really to reduce that stigma as much as we can. And I think the more we talk about abortion as a normal part of healthcare is part of that process. That being said, I do totally agree with Ashley that we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that does not contribute to a narrative of a right and a wrong abortion.
I think both of you said that really well. I also hope for a world where reproductive health care is not stigmatized, that the things that we experience that cause us to make the decisions we make isn't stigmatized. And so I think a big part of that is people sharing their stories. And at the same time, I don't think people should be pressured to do that. I mean, in a world where there is not abortion stigma, you can share your story if you want to. You can keep it private if you want to. I mean, I go to the doctor and I get, procedures and exams done, and I don't always talk about that. But at the same time, I would if somebody asked me or whatever. So that's just like the same way we should be looking at abortion, is like, it's a procedure, it is stigmatized, but to break down that stigma, we need to name it for what it is, which is abortion, and not say things like women's health care or like any of these other little euphemistic things because we're scared to say the A word. And we should listen to other people's abortion stories with empathy and with understanding, and we should not be afraid to share ours if we want to. But in a world where abortion is normalized, it wouldn't be such a shocking thing, and that to me is like a goal to get to that place.
Yeah, I think as we try to work to that place, I totally agree with breaking down the stigma. Like, we have to name, like, it's patriarchy, right? Like, it's this white male dominant culture. We have to name the way women and folks with repro systems can show up in these systems, because I think that ripples into lots of conversations, whether you're talking about abortion or birthing processes, right? Like, there's a number of spaces where we can't share our stories or show up authentically, or it's very nuanced because of the oppression that we have within these systems. And so I think once we start to dismantle, reimagine, rebuild these systems in a way that are not inherently oppressive, specifically to women and folks with repro systems, then we can start to get and chip away at the ripples and symptoms of that, which is, stigmatizing abortion or other healthcare access that we experience or want to experience.
Exactly. And it's not just stigma around abortion either. I mean, I have never had an abortion, but I delayed getting really important care that I needed because of stigma around reproductive health. I didn't have a pap smear till I was like 20. And then when I finally got one, I ended up having some cancerous tissue that needed to be removed. And if I hadn't ended up getting that exam, which I got at Planned Parenthood because I didn't have insurance and they had the sliding scale, and my boyfriend at the time was like, you haven't had a pap smear, like, let's go to Planned Parenthood. And I was like, oh my God, I can't go to Planned Parenthood. Like, it's all of this societal stigma that could have caused me to lose my fertility or have a terrible diagnosis or worse, you know? And if I had just been raised, gotten comprehensive sex education, had a stigma-free upbringing where I knew, like, girl, if you're having sex, if you're 18, like, go get a pap smear, it's fine, then I would have had a much better health outcome. So it's not even just about stigma around abortion or, you know, pregnancy or any of the nasty little things that we're doing in sex or whatever. Like, it's healthcare as a whole that needs to be destigmatized. And that's something that so many people can relate to.
There's one brief important question I want to get to, and I think, Andi, this is a question for you. Abigail asked if Planned Parenthood the only place in Nebraska to receive to have abortion care, and if so, how do people in Western Nebraska navigate this?
Yeah, I saw that question. That's great. So we are not the only ones that provide abortion care in Nebraska. There is the Care Clinic in Bellevue, Nebraska, that also provides care. We are the two that advertise as providing abortion care. My estimation is that there are some other OBGYNs in the state that do, but you wouldn't necessarily find them on Google. So, but the idea of access and the fact that all of the abortion providers are on the western side of the state is a big part of the barriers and the challenge. Western Nebraska, you know, a lot of them go to Colorado or come to Lincoln. Those are kind of the two primary. Senator Hunt has been working for a couple years now on repealing the ban on telehealth being used for medication abortion, because that's one of those things that really could expand access for Western Nebraska. Outside of that, it's really challenging to have abortion clinics outside of major metropolitan areas. Cost-wise, you know, we don't find a lot of super friendly communities to work in outside of some of those. So finding other ways to break down some of those barriers is some of the creativity that we're looking for and working with the legislature on. But yeah, hopefully that helps answer the question.
We have a really exciting First Amendment question. Scout, this one is for you. Or unless anyone else wants to, but Abigail asked, how can the First Amendment right to freedom of religion be used to promote safe access to abortion? Abigail also gave an interesting example in that Judaism considers life to begin at birth, thus allowing women to have abortions from a religious standpoint. As we know, there is some religious and political charge around the science behind that. So, Scout, how can we use the First Amendment to protect access?
I think that's very important question, and thank you for that, Abigail. As far as legally, I would say the bottom line is when it comes to abortion, you don't need to be bringing in the First Amendment to it. We have the 14th Amendment, 50 years of precedent that guarantee our rights to, in this, what they call the zone of privacy. So like your right to make decisions about your family and whether you're going to homeschool and what you're going to do with your body. And that includes abortion. But that being said, from an advocacy perspective, I think that faith-based perspective for abortion rights supporters is very important, because it's all too often commandeered by anti-abortion folks. So I don't want to sell that perspective short in advocacy, and maybe others can speak to that. But I think that a faith-based perspective when it comes to policy advocacy and public education and just getting the word out and spreading those ideas to advocates is very important.
You know, abortion is religious freedom, because this is only like from a Christian nationalist evangelical perspective that abortion is necessarily wrong. In Judaism, you know, if I were pregnant and I could die in childbirth, then I would be obligated to get an abortion. And so to for people to even say that, like, oh, my religion, it's a religious issue, blah, blah, blah. It's a religious freedom issue to make sure that abortion is safe and legal. So again, it's like, it's not just patriarchal oppression or white oppression. It's Christian nationalist oppression that's saying you all should live the same way that we do. And, our Constitution, that's not really what it's about.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that are in there right now. Unless anyone's on there live and has a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Let's do a little wrap up since we're having such a great time, but fortunately we're coming close to the end. One, I don't want to say it's a fun question, but I guess it's interesting. It's holiday season. People are hanging out with their families again after a year of being apart, and at the same time in a little bit more politically charged environment. How do you guys engage with your family, friends, people who might hold different views on reproductive justice? And at the same time, when you're engaging in those conversations, what are some issues, values, or key points that are often overlooked? Everyone's thinking about how they talk to their family about this right now.
The one thing I always go back to is common values. I think that no matter what the kind of dividing political views or differing views on some of the issues that we're discussing, I think there's plenty of things that folks agree on, such as, one of the most common and easiest ones is personal freedoms, personal liberty, the right to make individual choices that impact us. Talking about those shared values and those things that really are at the heart of what we all said at the beginning of this about why we care about this issue. That's always a starting point, is finding that common ground of what you value.
I think it's such an interesting question that could be used for abortion access and rights, right? Or like having conversations about addressing institutional racism, like all the things. And so I've tried to take the approach of one, I have a bubble and a boundary, and folks that do not align or cause harm don't get to come into that space. So like for folks of color or women that are in this space that are feeling like that they have family, right, that do not align and diminish and oppress based on their identities or their experiences, I would encourage you to keep your peace and change a guest list for the holiday, right? Like you don't have to have that conversation. So I just want to prioritize people first. If you decide to have that conversation, I think really being clear and back aligning to Andi's point of like, what are your values in this? And like, all this work, right, is helping people understand how our values align again and make sure that it might not be your bag, but that doesn't mean you get to choose it for someone else. And so going back to, hey, this is about choice. If you choose not to engage in abortion, whether you have a reproductive system or not, that's your choice, but don't make that my choice, and how we don't allow for institutions, governments, and courts and so on to decide that for us. And so I think, again, if you decide to engage in that conversation, because you don't have to, that value alignment and really being clear on what that looks like for you will be really important as you decide to have that conversation.
I agree with Ashlei about protecting your own self and drawing a boundary for your own sanity and also for your children. I mean, I think about this differently now that I'm a parent because, I can kind of deal with my family members or people around me, but like, I don't want that stress put on my child. And so I now protect them just as much as I protect myself, more so. So I'm in a unique position because like by definition in my job, I'm super, super forward about all of my beliefs, however controversial they are to people in my family or people around me. And so I do not instigate a lot of difficult conversations around the Thanksgiving or Christmas table or dinner table or whatever, because I have made it clear how I feel and people know how I feel and what I believe and that I walk the walk. And I think that that's honestly sometimes the best way to change people's minds, is to just be confident, normalize it, say, this is what I believe and this is how I am. I'm never defensive about it. I don't need to be defensive about something that's right. It is what it is. And if you don't agree with me, like, that's something for you to evolve through, because I'm just not on that level. And then just moving in the world and acting from a place of love all the time, and justice all the time, and humility, and being willing to learn every day and be better every day, all the time. And if I can set that example for my child, I'll consider my time on this earth successful. And if I can make anybody else rethink some of their deeply held beliefs because of the way I move in the world, then that's icing on the cake. But all I can worry about is myself and my behavior and my little kiddo. And I think that that's been the most helpful perspective for me.
Ashlei, everyone's loving your no turkey for haters.
Listen, I know I've been in the chat. I've been talking to my friends because y'all my friends, because y'all get it. Like, and that's the hard part with this, and again, I have lived experience and identities, right? So it feels different navigating, but just in general, like, I'm not obligated to put myself in harm's way. Like, I have to protect myself so I can continue to pour into the movement, pour into my family, pour into all of these other things. And sometimes this work is at the consequence of you. And I am a firm believer at this point in my career of this work cannot be at the consequence of me. And so I love you, family, and I hope the best for you. And also, you can't come into my space. Like, that's just what it is. I've deleted a lot of Facebook friends, left a lot of group chats, because that's not what I'm going to do. And I'm not going to tolerate that and hoping that you evolve. That's not okay for me. That value alignment is not there. And that's a hard line for me. And so I'm not going to put myself there. You don't get no turkey. You don't get no dressing. And, you'll figure it out.
I love that. Okay, so we're close to almost 5 minutes left. We'll start with just a quick wrap up. I know some people have to dip. So any final statements of, hope mixed with reality, I think is a good way to phrase it, and that we do have power. This isn't a done deal, but at the same time, we need to be realistic about the challenges that we are facing. So Senator Hunt, you're up first.
Boy, I'm good at realistic. And sometimes, my cynicism and my sort of like innate pessimism, like, I'm kind of a glass half empty kind of gal by nature. And sometimes that can really get the best of me. And in politics, like, when you're supposed to be like on the mic inspiring people, like, sometimes you're saying stuff that they don't really want to hear. But, they say, the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. There's that famous quote, but I don't really believe that. I think that justice takes work. I think that we see in these generational cycles injustice and oppression and inequality. And this is something that we as a people have to unlearn. And I'm saying we specifically as white people, we specifically as middle-class white women who never really had to worry about this stuff before, that, just because something doesn't affect you doesn't mean A, that it never will affect you, or B, that it's not worth caring about. And that's kind of the generational pattern that I think we need to evolve through and outgrow, for us to make any headway that lasts more than a generation, so that our kids aren't saying, oh my God, is there anything that we can do about reproductive justice? And it's the same fight that our mothers had and our grandmothers had, on and on and on throughout history. As long as people have been getting pregnant, people have not wanted to be pregnant. And we know that abortion will never go away, that it's normal and it always has been. And you have to kind of take the mindset of, even though it's hard, you do what's right anyway. Even if you don't win today, you do what's right anyway. And in politics, especially, that's something that I've kind of learned. It's not that we're going to win every battle. It's that we show up to the battle and we do our best. And Senator Chambers used to say to me, after one, it was actually an abortion bill that we were just debating, and it ended up passing. And I was really upset about it, even though like I was in this realistic headspace and I was like, you know, what we expected to happen happened. I was really upset at the time. And he said to me, he took my shoulders and he goes, well, did you do your best? And I said, yes. And he said, well, then how can anyone ask any more of you? And I think about that all the time. Like, did you do your best? Then no one can ask any more of you. So as long as you go into the arena and do your best, at least you showed up and at least you were there. And how can anyone ask any more of you?
Thank you, Senator. Ashlei, final words.
Yeah, I just want to leave folks with the call to action and kind of like what's next in this. And so the folks on this Zoom, as well as other partners in community, are actively working to put ahead legislation that allows for us, right, to have power and choice. And then we'll address some of the concerns that Senator Megan raised. And so I just ask for folks to figure out what is your role in the movement. So get on all of our newsletter listservs, follow us on social media. We'll have lots of information and things coming out that will really allow for you to engage in the way in which you want to in this movement. And to Senator Megan Hunt's point, like, just figure out your role. Like, did you do your best in this space? So like, you don't have to do everything. We're not asking you to spend, you know, hours on end, or write an email to your senator, or be committed to calling once a week, or be committed to talking to your child about this work. Like, whatever that looks like for you, please make sure that you're using our resources that the organizations on the Zoom and outside of the Zoom are putting forth to really be educated in this space and to really, again, involve yourself in the movement, because it will take everyone, whether you have a repro system or not. Like, it will take everyone to really honor what we are saying that we need in this space. And so I hope that you get engaged and challenge you to as we get ready for an interesting and intense year ahead of us.
Thank you, Ashlei. Andi.
Yeah, so I would just add, you know, as Ashlei said, it's going to take all of us. It's going to take work. And I just keep going back to the fact that if we do the work, if we all come together and really do our best to fight this, we can win. That's the thing that I just, you know, I get a little bit afraid to say it out loud because I don't want to jinx anything. But every time I see one of the national lists of, you know, states that are most likely to ban abortion if Roe versus Wade is overturned, Nebraska's on that list. And it makes me angry because I think Nebraska is better than that. I think we, people are not putting us where we should be. The folks in this state, they don't want to be Texas. And so I think if we can get together, if we can all do the work, we have a fighting chance to protect access and prove people wrong, which is always kind of fun.
Thank you, Andi. And Scout.
I think I'm just going to reiterate what all of these amazing advocates have already said, but just to kind of drive it home, like, the threat is real. And it's the fact that they even took up this case and heard it today. It's very disheartening that they're willing to consider dismantling 50 years of precedent. But like, as Andi said, it's not a foregone conclusion that this is going to happen in Nebraska. And that's what we need to focus on and keep the hope that we can do this. And with all of us working together, we can stop this from happening in Nebraska, so Nebraskans can make these decisions and have dignity and self-determination and make autonomous decisions for themselves and their families.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for this amazing conversation. I think before we started this, I think some of our viewers and those who might be watching it later started this roundtable with a little bit more despair, and I hope that they leave feeling empowered and with hope. There are legislators out there fighting to protect this. There are advocates fighting to protect this, and organizations. You know where to find all of us, websites, emails, all that stuff. And as always, if there's any more questions, just put them in the Facebook comment chat and we'll try to get back to them after that. But as everyone said, the fight is not over, and it's traipsing up to our front doors in Nebraska. So we have to be prepared, and that includes starting from a place of power, not defeat. So thank you all, greatly appreciated it, and until next time.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, ACLU, for organizing this.
Thank
Y'all
you.
are awesome.